Welcome to the Defenders of Business Value, the podcast that helps business owners unlock the value they've built and exit on their terms. I'm your host, Ed Meisegland, and for the last 30 years, I've been helping business owners prepare, grow, protect, and ultimately sell their businesses. Whether you're a business owner, a buyer, or an advisor guiding others through the process, if you want to make your last deal your best one, you are in the right place. So let's get started. I historically have not been an ESOP fan. We're on the backside of these things where ESOPs show up at our doorstep and are asking to be unwound for a variety of reasons. Like I said, I was just not a fan at this level, right? That I just thought that a lot of these businesses either weren't suited for it, not big enough, just didn't have the horsepower in order to comply with all of the regulations associated with it. Until I met Chris Fredericks. So today, it's a different story. I mean, I am so stoked about what Empowered Ventures is building because it's a holdco, right? A holding company. Right now, it has 5 different companies. They're all ESOPs. And so the funny thing that this holdco, and Chris talked about, is just what a wonderful exit channel and options. You don't have to sell the whole company. You sell fractional interest into an ESOP. That gave the business owner the flexibility for an exit that he or she can be proud of, right? And not only that, it had to do with legacy. Every business owner tends to want to reward their employees. And often, as I mentioned before, when I was saying I wasn't much of a fan of ESOPs, it's because, unfortunately, the intersection between legacy and value maximization collided. In these situations where ESOPs are being deployed, this is more about legacy and taking care of employees for the long term. And Empowered Ventures is doing just that. So he created a model that blends market value-based exits with the long-term upside of the ESOP. Between you and me, I think more and more owners are going to be paying attention to exactly what he has built. So enjoy my conversation with Chris Fredericks of Empowered Ventures. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ed. Glad to be here.
Oh, man. The other way around. ESOPs are such a funny, and I don't want to say funny. I mean, it's an interesting exit channel. I think too many people don't understand. Aside from how you guys operate, I'm curious to know the mechanics of the ESOP, what do we say, the co-op, and then the EOT, right? Can we start there?
Sure. Yeah. So as you're suggesting, there's employee ownership as an option for business ownership or succession. In the U.S., there's kind of 3 main forms. I didn't even know about any of these until, it ended up being a good solution for a situation I was in, which I'm sure we'll get to. But an ESOP is by far the most widely used. And an ESOP is a benefit plan, basically, that owns the company or a part of the company. And the employees receive a financial benefit through kind of a retirement contribution of company shares. And those shares actually end up sitting, in a trust on their behalf. And on an annual basis, those shares will be revalued. It tends to function very similarly to a 401k profit share. That's kind of the mechanics, if you imagine that the profit share just comes in the form of company stock instead of, funds that get invested in a mutual fund or something. That's generally how ESOPs work. Co-ops are another form of employee ownership, not nearly as many of them in the country, but they're like a lot of co-ops. So co-ops exist for a lot of different things. Some folks like shop at a grocery co-op where the customers own the grocery store. So in a co-op situation, it's basically one share, one employee, one vote. And it's very much like all the employees own one share and they vote on who's going to be the board or the president of the co-op. It's a very democratic approach to employee ownership.
All right, and then EOT.
EOT is a very unique model that not as many people are familiar with and not as many have implemented, but it's also a trust kind of situation where a trust ends up owning part or all of the company. The employee ownership benefit comes purely in the form of dividends or a share of profits. And the company itself doesn't ever need to be valued for the purpose of the trust. It's just a very flexible approach It doesn't have any of the benefits of tax benefits that ESOPs have. It pays taxes, and then, on an annual basis, some percentage of profits usually get distributed to the employees. And that's the way a trust usually works.
Now we're warmed up and ready to go.
Right.
So tell me your story into the ESOP world and then Empowered Ventures. I'm so stoked to hear, because it's not a normal model.
My story really quickly is, grew up in Indiana, went to IU, got an accounting degree, ended up in public accounting, decided that wasn't going to be for me long term. I kind of started feeling entrepreneurial. I grew up in a family business, a construction company.
What kind of construction?
General construction, roofing. I re-roofed my own high school growing up, so that was interesting. I ended up deciding to go into a privately owned company in Carmel, Indiana called TVF, which stands for Top Value Fabrics, kind of in a mid-level role, accounting role, but really with a hunger to help the company grow and succeed. The founding owner at the time, his name was Dick Hansel, he ended up mentoring me, giving me a lot of opportunities. Within a few years, I had basically been moved into a CFO role, and he continued to kind of lean on me and give me a lot of great opportunity to have impact on the business. So around 2009, 2010, we were working together, and he confided that his biggest challenge was succession planning. He had had multiple failed attempts to transition the business through a management buyout, and he was just not feeling comfortable with any of the other options. He'd explored all the traditional options. He really wanted to preserve, the business and the way it does business, and the way, he didn't want that to get messed up. He didn't want to sell to competition. And he also was concerned, about who was going to lead the company in the future. So at that point, he asked me to help him figure out his succession planning. And he basically confided in me that he thought I could lead the company at some point in the future. So I didn't know anything about ESOPs at the time. We did end up briefly exploring whether I could purchase the company through, with investors and SBA and all that stuff. And I couldn't get comfortable with it. I was only 32 years old at the time. I think it was a little bit outside of my comfort zone.
What made you not comfortable? I mean, was it the normal personal guarantee? It's like,
well, and I didn't know enough about SBA to really seriously consider it. And I just didn't have enough people sophisticated enough to invest either. I think Dick couldn't get comfortable with it either because, probably some amount of seller note would be involved. It just was a little outside the realm for me of possibility. I started exploring other options. Our accounting firm, Katz Miller, which a lot of your listeners might be familiar with in the central Indiana area, they are also an employee-owned accounting firm, which is, not common. And they have an ESOP practice. They recommended we consider ESOP and educated me on how it would work. As soon as I understand how it could work, I felt really confident. The TVF was one of those right situations for an ESOP transaction. I recommended it to Dick, and then within 9 months, let's say, we were able to execute the ESOP buyout. And with that, I also took over leadership of the company.
Tell me day 1 through 30 post ESOP. How did that look?
It was very interesting. The employees, the rest of my colleagues didn't know anything about what was coming. I immediately embarked on a process of doing some education and a lot of Q&A and individual meetings just to help people understand, that number one, no big changes are coming. It's just business as usual. Number two, this is a really great opportunity for everybody, but it's also not a lottery ticket. Like, we didn't all just strike it rich.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And honestly, I gave them a lot of heads up that the first few years of being an ESOP typically aren't very exciting from a financial perspective either. Like, the first statement was likely to be small, and it takes years of accumulating shares, for it to ultimately kind of lead to something really meaningful. So it was just kind of a keep chopping wood, let's build this company. And I did a lot of listening too. Like, one of the things that came out of the early days was some relief, because there was fear about what would happen to the business. Dick had some health issues, and everyone knew he needed to figure out his succession planning at some point. So
you had said that the owner had explored management buyouts. So when it became an ESOP, did those managers become flight risks, or were they relieved that somebody now took that weight off their shoulders?
I was concerned about flight risk. There weren't many people that knew this was coming, but I did, before the transaction was signed, I did spend some time to bring a few of the key people into the loop and make sure they felt like they at least knew what was coming, that they weren't going to get completely broadsided as part of an announcement. I was concerned. I would say there was a mix with them too. There was some relief. There may have been some disappointment with some of them for sure. I was able to paint a picture of, like, let's say the next 10 years go pretty well. And you can kind of calculate what that could be worth, to people in an ESOP situation. And I shared that with them. I said, I think this is conservative. I think if we hit our goals and grow the business, I think you could be looking at, this kind of an account value in 10 years. And they were pretty excited about what I put in front of them. And it was pretty interesting.
You were in the company, right? So, I mean,
Yes.
it was that had to provide some level of comfort that you were there, right?
I think there was definitely some level of comfort that I'm not an outsider. Like, I had gotten some amount of trust built up. But on the flip side, I'm a 32-year-old, accounting guy telling all these textile experts that here's where we're going to go. So early on, I did spend a lot of time trying to signal really clearly that I've got all the answers person. I am going to lean into this being more about us than me. We did start, as a group, to instill even more of a voice for all of the workers in the business to try to reinforce what employee ownership would mean, for TVF in the future.
My understanding is limited on ESOPs, but I had always heard that most of the exiting owners were against ESOPs because they were going to have to guarantee the debt. And so my question is, you said that the exiting owner was anti, seller debt in that capacity, but yet if it's true that they have to guarantee the ESOP debt, I mean, how did you get through that?
Well, and I think you're right. I think one of the reasons ESOPs aren't, completed at a larger scale in this country, annually, only about 250 to 300 new ESOPs get formed in the whole country, which is really, not a lot. And I think one of the reasons is there typically can be a fair amount of seller debt involved. And ours was one of those cases too. Our business owner, the founder, that was one of the things he had to accept to do an ESOP transaction, was actually a significant amount of seller debt. He was able to get comfortable with it in his case because I was going to be leading the company and he and I had a good relationship. He would continue as chairman of the board on a very small 3-person board. And he did have some guarantees baked in where if we missed any of the seller note payments, he would be able to exercise more control, ultimately. But it is a downside, and it does make it a challenge to complete those transactions sometimes.
Everybody hears the horror stories of the compliance requirements of an ESOP.
There's a lot of DOL kind of. There can be some compliance stuff for sure.
Have you ever heard the name Hunter Hawley, Hawley?
Yeah, I know Hunter.
So I was excited when I heard that he was trying to roll this out in scale to make that. I don't know whatever happened to that plan, but boy, I really was hoping that thing would get some legs.
It's exciting to have people like Hunter working on streamlining the ESOP process and all of that. And I don't want to speak for anything about where he's at with it, but it's a great idea. I think, to your point, in an ESOP transaction, there's trustees involved on the other side. That's who you're negotiating with. Because ESOPs do have complication and challenge and Department of Labor kind of guidance, trustees tend to have a baked, kind of a clear sense of how they want to go about doing transactions. There doesn't tend to be a lot of flexibility, I love ESOPs. I think they're great for the right situations, but also I'm pretty practical in the sense of knowing that there's a lot of reasons people don't choose them. And I think that's a little bit of what led to us kind of trying to bring a different solution to the table.
And candidly, running in the exit planning world for so many years, it's an interesting exit channel, an excellent exit channel for the right situation. So many business owners want to do the right thing by the people that have helped them create wealth. This will reward you. Can you talk about what makes a good ESOP?
What makes a great ESOP? Definitely a company that has generally pretty stable, earnings, selling and selling to an ESOP, banking on a lot of future growth. When you hear some of the horror stories about when ESOPs go wrong, it's, the valuation was high because the growth expectations were high, but those don't materialize. And then now you've got troubles. Beyond that, I think an owner who has really already delegated a lot of the management, to a group of leaders, can really go a long way. Just in industry that's fairly stable too, just like there's a general kind of consistency to the business. So I think it's, in a simple sense, it's a consistent company where management is already doing a lot of work leading the company. Those tend to be the really good fits for ESOPs. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Empowered. You get your first ESOP.
Right.
Now what?
So 2010, we became an ESOP. From 2010 to 2020, we were a single company ESOP. TVF had a great decade. I began focusing on growing through acquisition along the way for TVF. And we did one add-on acquisition of a competitor, and I explored many others too in the textile space. And the company itself organically grew a fair amount too. And so the financial performance improved, and we built up a really strong balance sheet, paid off all the seller debt, paid off all of our bank debt, and just got in a really strong position. But by, let's say, 2018, I was starting to feel less confident that there were going to be a lot of great additional acquisition opportunities consistently in the textile space. It's a pretty small niche. And so the idea came to mind for me, just knowing about Berkshire Hathaway and other diversified holding companies out there. That idea came to mind, like, what if we did that, as part of this, situation with TVF and the ESOP? And what really excited me about that was a couple things. One was, an ESOP is a retirement account that people really end up counting on when it works. But the idea of getting down the road and so many people counting on that, and then what if we hit hard times at just the wrong moment? Like, as well as we might succeed as a business, you can't control everything. And it really scares me to imagine, a lot of people counting on that for their retirement and then running into troubles. So diversification actually really seemed like a good idea to me. In addition to that, I just had a sense that if we developed a capability around acquisitions and overseeing and stewarding companies, we could be an interesting solution for some business owners that could bring employee ownership, but avoid a lot of the downsides of, doing an ESOP transaction.
So I'm a company and you buy me.
Yep.
And do I automatically become an ESOP? Does the employee of the company also then become an employee or a member of the ESOP of the holdco?
Right. When we do a transaction as part of Empowered Ventures, we're never creating a new ESOP. We have one holding company ESOP. And when we acquire the business, on that day, all the employees of the newly acquired business, join our existing ESOP.
Interesting. So the holdco, and then you have the subsidiaries for each of the 5 companies.
Right.
So how did you pick the 5 companies? You talk about diversification. So we got machining, we got thermoforming, we got HVAC. You've got across the board.
We've gotten pretty diversified still, mostly in industrial kind of B2B environments and trades and construction. That's been our general kind of overarching comfort to focus on for now. We're not open to literally everything, these days. Like, we do want to kind of still find things that fit our comfort, our understanding of B2B and industrial spaces. But outside of that, we've cast a really wide net and been open to looking at a lot of things. And yeah, we've been doing the Empowered Ventures thing since 2020. And now we've acquired 5 more businesses, 4 being those new platform standalones. And then we've done 1 additional add-on as well. It's been a learning experience. We're still early, I would say. We're building up our capability of doing this, but we feel pretty good about it so far.
The funny thing is, I do this podcast, and rarely does a week that doesn't go by that I have, and it doesn't matter the guest, hey, where do they source deals from?
Right.
Yeah. So when you're coming in, right? I mean, I assume you're leading with, we've got a solution to your problem. How do you position Empowered?
We've used the traditional kind of through the broker network approach, and we've done some direct. But honestly, we haven't done as much direct in the past as maybe we would like to going forward. We're going to be increasing our direct outreach. And of course, we've also just built up a fair amount of awareness with a lot of people, advisors, friends. And so we get deal flow, just from people knowing about us. It's been really good. I think the broker path has actually been interesting for us because from what I gather, brokers and bankers, one of the things they really value is being able to put someone in front of the business owner who has high confidence of closing, but is differentiated, isn't just, another option that's just like all the other options. We've actually found that they've been pretty happy and intrigued to find us as a new and interesting option for the right situations.
Going forward, is this a model that you created, or is this a model that's lots of people have and I've just never heard of it, which is really possible?
We definitely didn't create it. I would say I did kind of think of the idea without knowing a lot about what others were doing, but I don't need the credit. There's quite a few others who've been doing it as well for a while. There's even one that's like much bigger than everybody else doing it. That's a fascinating story if anyone ever wants to dig into Houchins in Kentucky. It's a really interesting ESOP holding company. I think there's about 10 or 20 of us out there, doing relatively similar work.
Yeah, but you look at the landscape of all the businesses, 20 or 30 that are doing it. Good for you guys. So when you go to buy a company, I mean, what does the capital stack look like? I mean, are you borrowing money like anybody else would, or does the ESOP have to vote? What does all that look like?
So our ESOP is governed like a lot of ESOPs, which is a pretty typical board of directors kind of corporate governance approach. So the ESOP and the employee owners don't typically vote on anything. The only thing the ESOP requires vote, it would be on like the dissolution of the company, like selling out the entire business is usually how most ESOPs work. So yeah, when we go to do a transaction, we need our board support and we need any financing support. So it's actually pretty simple. And from a financing perspective, we use cash from on hand from our balance sheet. And then as of today, we've only used some senior financing at the holding company level. So we're using our collective, borrowing power as a holding company to finance the whole rather than doing transaction specific financing.
So when you buy a company, let's just say you have acquisition number 6. Are the other 5 as stoked about your acquisition, or are they like, geez, we got some new friends in Vermont?
Yeah, right. Because we're still early, just 5-6 years in, I think the general feeling is very positive about what we're doing. Of course, there's probably some question at times, like, are we sure we want to buy that kind of business or whatever? So, the proof's always going to be in the pudding with a situation like this. I think people at EV are very excited when we buy a new company because they know that if we grow the pie a lot bigger, that means their shares have a lot more potential to grow.
Had there been any times where you're like, man, what was I thinking? I mean, it's working out well, but everybody sits there and goes, golly, like, what was I thinking about this? Do you have those moments? And what are they about? Is it managerial, or this is hard to do?
Oh, yeah. In the framework of an ESOP, it does increase an interesting level of accountability for leaders. I've experienced, to your point, of like, wow, this is a lot of pressure. And not that I would need anybody to feel bad for me, but giving employees a real voice and a real sense of ownership, which we do and we believe in very deeply, means they care about, what happens. And that means if something bad happens, they have to digest that news in a whole different manner than maybe a typical employee. So it does increase a sense of accountability to the rest of my fellow employee owners that if I just owned the business, it would feel like, well, I'm mostly the one being impacted by this market, struggling or whatever, but that's not the case here.
I'll bet you it changes the culture too. It almost force feeds good culture. It almost force feeds, if you're not on the bus for the right reasons, those on the bus are going to boot you off the bus, right?
Yeah, it definitely can. I think it's hot sauce on the culture. So if you have a toxic culture or a business is really going through extremely hard times, employee ownership could probably in some ways help if your culture pulls together and everybody, or it could actually go the opposite where people start to feel like, the employee ownership thing was just not actually a real thing and they become disgruntled or disheartened. So it can go both ways, I think.
Interesting. One of the things that I love that you said was employee ownership needs to be pulled by employees, not pushed by owners. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that comment in particular came to mind at some point as I've thought about, in the employee ownership space, the ESOP world, everybody talks a lot about how do we increase the number of employee owners and ESOPs and stuff, because there's a lot of people that really believe in the good that it can do for society. But there's kind of a sense of like, to the point of all the points we talked about earlier, like business owners have a lot to care about when they think about succession planning. And that's absolutely a heavy burden they have to deal with. And it shouldn't be their number one goal to only think about like what society's benefit from this succession process is going to be. So if we're going to get more kind of motive to do employee ownership at a larger scale, what we actually might need is employees generally writ large understanding that it's even an option. And almost like asking for it, like saying, hey, go into the business owner and saying, hey, have you ever looked into this? I think it could be really good for our company. Because an interesting thing that most business owners don't know is you don't have to sell the whole company. ESOPs can be minority ESOPs. It could own 20%. It could own 30%. And it could be a really nice benefit without changing that much actually about the company.
You probably have seen that the state is really doubling down on how to support like rural businesses. Part of this conversation was like, the best buyer may be in that business right now. Don't call it for third party work. This might work. Now it's back to compliance, right? You were from the GC world. I came from concrete, right? And those guys are like, yeah, there is no ESOP there, unless, of course, you found somebody that could translate what everything meant. I'm curious to know if that's where you think the puck is going to go. Do you think it's going to be easier to form and manage and comply with all the rules, regulations, and so on and so forth? I think it's going to.
I hope so. There's definitely work being done today at the federal level, like directly in the Department of Labor, and also work being done to actually have more new legislation on to make things easier and better. So I think there's definitely effort towards it. I'm hopeful. Yeah.
Are you participatory in any of that? I got to believe if you're one of 30 that are doing it right, I got to imagine that you have to have some voice in like, hey, take a look at what we're doing here.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of just relationship-based dialogue going on between us and a lot of the people involved in kind of trying to grow employee ownership and even at talking at the government level and stuff. So yeah, we're supportive and involved behind the scenes for sure.
Todd Young, so he was on the entrepreneurship subcommittee. They were talking about exits, right? Like business sales and so on and so forth. And I'll bet you 90% of what everybody talked about was ESOPs. No any of the other 7 transfer channels. It was all ESOPs. Now, as a third party guy, I'm like, hey, where's our love? What are you doing here? But my point is that it seems as though it's resonating from way above, right?
I think it is. Yeah. The data actually shows they've done surveys that in a very political climate, which we're all living in, ESOPs are one of the few things that, or employee ownership as a concept, are one of the few things that gets like high approval on all sides. So yeah, I think it's resonating.
I'm a business owner and you show up. What's your pitch to me? It's easy to look at the website and say, he's got it all together, but I can only imagine what the sellers are thinking. Like you show up, you say, look, I think we have something here. Let's have an exploratory conversation. Then we develop into a relationship okay, so tell me what that looks like. Because I imagine that the business owner, the first thing they do is crimp down on, wow, I can sell this to my employees. I'm going to get a premium value. I'm going to dun, 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 dun. So take me through that.
We approach it in a very relationship-driven way where we're first just trying to understand what they care about, right? I mean, because sometimes even business owners might be interested in us for a different reason than just the employee ownership piece. So for example, we're very long-term oriented. We buy with no intention of ever selling. So that actually is one of the higher resonating things that we have found with business owners versus just the employee ownership, which they tend to care about as well. So it's really, the pitch is, we're not just trying to say we're the right answer for every situation. But the pitch is that we're a home for a business that's going to benefit the employees for the long term. I mean, that's really the pitch.
The ESOPs that have shown up at our doorstep that are wanting to be unwound, they were overvalued, right?
Yep.
And so if you're hung up on a premium price and you want to go third-party sale and you want to go through the process, ESOPs are more fair market value.
That's right. And in our case too, like it's totally understandable if a business owner wants to get maximum dollar for their business. That's like truly understandable. That's not going to be usually an ESOP outcome or ours. But at the same time, we pride ourselves in trying to be competitive with our offers as best we can, for sure.
In my research with you, as well as some of the ESOPs that we've seen, I mean, there's a difference, right? If you're interested in legacy and caring for your employees and you're okay taking a half a turn less on your multiple, ESOPs are a great way to go, right? But if you're absolutely hung up that you need to get premium value for whatever reason, and you'll reward your employees in whatever capacity, if at all, there's nothing wrong with that either. And I'm certain you've seen it. You know, the highest price is not always the best buyer, ever.
Yeah, we've typically been, from what we've gathered, like when we've been involved in a process, like we've not ever been the highest, but we've been usually second or third and like not too far off, you know? So yeah, it's been interesting to kind of, you know, get to know business owners from that angle as well.
Well, let's talk about your podcast. So tell me about it.
Yeah, thanks. We have a podcast. It's called Empowered Owners. The whole point of the podcast really is for our employee owners. It's really more of an internal communications tool, but we figured why not make it public, because it does seem like a lot of people listen to it who just want to kind of peek under the hood of Empowered Ventures and how we think, and it's really worked. I like to think it's the, you know, most successful podcast in the world with the smallest possible audience, or TAM. It's been fun.
Just thinking outside the box. What a great way to communicate, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun.
What are the questions, or a question, what haven't I asked that it's like, you know what, people need to understand this about, whether it's Empowered Ventures or it's just about the whole ESOP environment?
To your point earlier about valuation, I've heard people almost in the ESOP world at times say that ESOP is a generous thing to do by a business owner. And I think it is, but also we have to be careful not to paint it as charity or something. You are getting a fair market value for your company. Maybe big picture, the thing that I've resonated with the business owners we've worked with the most is they're in touch with a fear of regret. Like, I don't know about you, but there's definitely been people I've met who've sold their business and then felt pretty devastated by what happened to the company over time afterwards. That's really regret minimization, is, they say, one of the best ways to kind of preserve your happiness in the future. So just knowing what's really going to make you happy is actually a really hard thing to do, and really good work to do as a business owner when you think about succession planning. Coupled
with, you know what, and you can stay involved.
Yes, right? That's true.
So if I'm a business owner, I sell you 49% of the company, and so I'm 60, and every couple of years I want to sell an additional 10%.
Yep.
I can do that.
Yeah, that would work, especially if you're doing your own ESOP and setting up an ESOP at the beginning, let's say a minority ESOP, and then doing tranches. Today at EV, we do 100% buyouts. Not to say we wouldn't consider partial, but yeah, I mean, I think you're making a great point, which is, you know, for a business owner who's not ready to hang up the spikes or whatever, but wants to stay involved, maybe even shift to like a board chairman position, doing an ESOP is a great way, because a lot of business owners do really struggle with, what am I going to do after this is done too?
And that's exactly where I was going. Yeah. Is that so Brian Shudd had written this article in the IBJ, and I wrote a counterpoint about the silver tsunami. I don't think it's a big massive wave. I think it's a wave, but it's not a real big one. And rightfully so. The business owners are older, they're healthier. Where are they going to park their money? So in a ESOP environment, right, that accomplishes what you're going for, right? You've now started down the exit path. Now you control your exit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if you want to keep leading the company, you know, do a partial ESOP, keep leading the business as usual.
Or even not. If you got 2 or 3 that's in leadership roles that you can coach up, man, why wouldn't you do that? Interesting. How can people find you?
Oh, yeah, appreciate that. We're available empowered.ventures, no .com or anything. I'm available directly. People can email me, chris@empowered.ventures. Happy to answer any questions. When people reach out to me, I don't try to sell EV. I just try to figure out how I can be helpful. So if anybody wants to reach out about any of this, I'm happy to help.
Well, your reputation preceded you as far as your willingness to be transparent and helpful. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Defenders of Business Value. If today's episode helped you think differently about building or selling a business, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you want to become a more informed, confident owner, the one who knows how to grow, protect, and eventually exit at maximum value, subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to talk about your next deal, connect with me on LinkedIn. So until next time, we'll see you soon.